Welcome back to A Writer's Mind. I'm Delshri Gladden, and you who are listening may have noticed there was not an episode last week. I got really overloaded with some other projects that I needed to focus my time on, so I wasn't able to get much writing done, for one, and I just wasn't able to have time to record either. But I got through that project. I did get some revisions done. I still haven't gotten through all of them. But I did come up with some important changes and ideas even further from what I had already been planning to make, which I think is going to help me really start to add some depth to this story. So I had talked about earlier that I needed to make some changes to the story based on some of the things that I had decided to change or move forward in a slightly different way that had to do with the world and the characters. So as I've been working on revisions over this past week, some new ideas have kind of been poking at me, trying to get me to pay attention, which sometimes I'm just like I already rethought that. Why do I need to rethink it again? But if those ideas are coming to mind, it's a good idea to go ahead and rethink it one more time, which will probably be, one more of many times things like that will come up. So one of the things that I had talked about last episode was that I needed to add to and further develop the conflict between Cal and Beatrix. That just having her kind of being annoyed with him and that coming up wasn't feeling important enough, and I wanted to develop that further. So I had been talking about adding that need for depth there to the overall story and needing to make the reason that there's this karmic disruption even more important, because it wasn't big enough that it was just a girl has disappeared, not with the change that the story is more about these karmic disruptions causing problems between both worlds than just finishing the investigation and making a judgment on the person. So I needed more depth with both of those, and so I talked about bringing together an addition to both storylines with Beatrix was not the first investigator brought into looking at this disruption. And originally I had thought that she would be aware of the fact that she's being pulled in mid-investigation, trying to determine what happened. And I was thinking about everything I would need to do to go back and make changes to the early chapters, because that was going to cause significant changes in the way that she was looking at the case, her viewpoint of how it had been so rushed, so she was making allowances on not getting a lot of information, and I was going to need to change a lot of that, which I was fine doing. I didn't mind diving into those bigger rewrites. That wasn't motivation for why I've decided to pivot again, which takes away the need to make a lot of those changes. But basically, I thought that with the problems that I already had in place between Beatrix and Cal, what was the likelihood going to be that this investigation started off and didn't go super great because both the subject of the investigation and the investigator are now missing. So he's kind of already not in a good place as the supervisor of this investigation. So being who he is kind of going to complicate things more. Someone who is competent and honest and just, kind of not an asshole would have brought in someone else and said, okay, here's where we're at. We don't know what happened to the other investigator. The girl's missing. We're kind of in a bad spot here. We need to come together, figure it out, get this going, get things taken care of. That would be, again, like a good supervisor who wasn't just a lousy person would take that approach. But Cal has had this kind of underlying desire to get rid of Beatrix by putting her in these situations and giving her these cases that increase the likelihood that she will get stuck somewhere, that she's going to get trapped with her subject because she can't finish the investigation in time. So in his mind, everybody already looks at him as being this lousy supervisor. He was a bad investigator. He's not good at his job. Nobody likes him on a personal level either. It's not just Beatrix who has a problem with him. So he doesn't really have a ton to lose by this case just falling completely apart, but he does have something to gain in potentially getting rid of Beatrix. So I kind of, as I was doing revisions on the first 5 chapters, I was seeing these moments where there was really some potential for Cal to really become a villain of sorts in this story, to go from being mildly annoying to really causing significant problems for not just Beatrix, but for the fate of these 2 worlds that are intertwined dimensionally. He is so intent on causing problems for Beatrix and trying to get away from her or get rid of her that he is either willing to potentially destroy 2 worlds or doesn't really grasp the full consequence of his actions and is just thinking, oh, so what? So one case falls apart and yeah, maybe I'll get reprimanded, but I get what I want by getting rid of Beatrix and then I don't have to deal with her and she's, locked up somewhere in purgatory or whatever. So Cal makes the decision that when the first investigator goes missing, along with Arya, he calls in Beatrix and just hands things over to her like this is just a normal case. Except instead of Arya being investigated, he presents it as Sage is the focus of the investigation. So he only gives her the information in the file related to Sage and a little bit of other things here and there because Arya is still involved in this, but she's no longer the suspect. So he's giving her less information than what the first person started with, and he hasn't really updated based on what the first investigator was learning. So he's putting her at an extreme disadvantage and not really guiding or helping her along the way. So he knows this bigger story, but Beatrix is coming in completely blind on a rushed timeline, believing that this case is about Arya disappearing, and that's what she's investigating, and she's trying to figure out what happened. And as I was working on chapter 5 over the weekend, there were some conversations between Cal and Beatrix where she's kind of giving him an update. And I was realizing as I was going through this that she should be starting to pick up on the fact that a missing girl is not enough to cause this big of a karmic disturbance. And so she's starting to kind of put those pieces together and think something's a little off with this investigation, but she still kind of thinks that's mainly due to Cal's incompetence and him being a terrible supervisor. So she's starting to ask a little bit of questions, but she's not to the point of thinking, something's really wrong or unusual or, thinking that there's more to it than just like, this is kind of a weird case. Why are we focused on this girl disappearing? So she's starting to think at least like, there's got to be more to it. Like, I can't get too narrowed in on my list of who's involved because she's starting to understand this is a bigger case. So that I may need to rework a few things in the early chapters again to account for that. But that's okay. But it is going to change, especially the next couple of chapters as I go through and work on revisions, because that's going to change some of the conversations that take place and how she's looking at the case as a whole. So she's not just trying to solve Arya's disappearance at this point. She's also trying to figure out what else is going on that has made this a problem for 2 worlds. Because I think I may have said in the earlier episode that, if they investigated every time someone went missing, they would do nothing else. Like, too many people go missing. That happens too often in real life, unfortunately. So this isn't a big enough deal for the karmic investigators to care, to be honest. So there's got to be more to it. So she's going to try to figure that out. And honestly, I'm trying to figure that out too, because I don't fully know what else is going on that's making this a bigger story or a bigger problem for the 2 worlds. But as I've been doing revisions, I've been looking for those opportunities of what have I maybe unintentionally set up already? And what can I build on to make this a bigger issue than just a missing girl? So I've started kind of making a list of a few of those things where I need to develop what is already there and where I need to add something to it. So one of the things is that I had introduced the character Riss early on, and I'd kind of put her in as a friend. She was maybe going to be a sounding board, which she hasn't been really at all. I haven't, aside from their trip to the taco restaurant, she really hasn't hardly been in the story at all. But she is there, and she's got this alibi. She's out of town the point at which Arya goes missing. So Beatrix's initial thought is that, well, obviously she doesn't have anything to do with anything. She wasn't even here. So she kind of writes her off. But as she's starting to think that there's something more to this investigation than what she originally thought, it also made me stop and think, I have this character here who is supposed to be Sage's best friend, and I've barely made any use of her at all. She's just she's popped up in, I think, like 2 scenes, and that's it. And she's not really having any sort of reaction to any of this either, which I started thinking, that's a little weird for a teenage girl. Her best friend is not doing anything like super weird, but she's certainly not behaving as she usually would. They probably would have normally hung out quite a bit, talked on the phone, or, well, I don't think teenagers talk on phones too much at this point, but they certainly would have been texting back and forth, they would have been in contact a lot. And I have not represented that at all in the story. So I think I'm not going to change the fact that Sage is focused on the investigation. She's not interacting with Riss a lot, but Riss needs to react to that. And as I was thinking about what level she would react, it made me start thinking, what else might be underlying their relationship that I could pull into this bigger story? Because yes, Riss is out of town when Arya disappears, but what about everything else? So I think I'm actually going to relook at Riss and see how she is involved in the wider problems that these girls are causing. Because as I'm pulling little bits and pieces together to start to get a better view of this, it's not just Sage. It's not just Arya either. They're both involved in whatever's going on. Her brother, I think I'm going to pull him in. Riss is going to come in. There's kind of this bubbling undercurrent of just not right, not good, hurtful, conniving actions that this, kind of group of young people are all going to be interconnected, and they're all kind of out for themselves. They're all trying to get different things. Leon, we've talked about, is abusive and manipulative. He's hunting these young women basically for his own gratification and chances to control and mistreat and all of that. And I'm starting to think that I think I'm going to go with Sage is kind of involved in all of that as well on some level, which has kind of caused problems between her and Arya. I had initially kind of planned for there to be a hidden relationship between Sage and Arya, and that's going to be unfolded over the course of the book. But I think more than that, there needs to be this web of relationships. And it's very toxic. It's causing a lot of problems for everybody. And it's getting to the point where they've been creating so much harm and damage within their community that is what has started to put this disturbance on notice of the karmic investigators. So I'm still building kind of what some of those connections are and playing with them in my mind. But there are going to be some issues of some relationships that have crossed boundaries that they shouldn't have in multiple ways, where one person thinks that they're the focus of their relationship when really there's a couple different things going on. There's some manipulation taking place. And there are ulterior motives on many sides that are also kind of going to be drawing in Arya's parents. The mom I haven't really dealt a lot with, but I would like to bring her in as kind of part side issue with Sage, that they've got something going on or some sort of relationship on some level. I don't think I'm going to take it to like an inappropriate sexual relationship, but they're going to have some sort of relationship that is not quite right, that is then causing problems between Arya and Leon, and she's kind of riling up some tensions that are already present in the household for her own benefit. Whether that's kind of just mean-spirited, she's unhappy at home, so she's causing unhappiness in their home as well, or if there's going to be some other intentionality there. Still thinking through that one and working that one out. But basically, I'm going to bring Rhys into that as well, that she's going to start pushing and saying, you know, why aren't she paying attention to me? Why aren't we hanging out as much? What's going on here? And she's going to start to bring up some of the things that they had been involved with in their own kind of games that they're playing and manipulations and all of that, that once Beatrix takes over Sage's body, she doesn't know any of that has been taking place. And so that's going to be very strange for Rhys, and she's not understanding how to interpret what's going on, which I think is then going to spill over into Sarah's attempt to help Sage with this investigation. She's on the outside, and I'm developing her as someone who's very observant but quiet. She picks up on a lot, but she doesn't necessarily get involved. Arya disappearing is the first thing that has really spurred her to kind of take some action in her personal life. Like, yes, she's on student council, so she wants to be engaged, but she's not necessarily someone who's going to stand up to people. But she's going to be someone who, in her efforts to figure out what has happened to her friend, she's wary of Beatrix, or of Sage, off the start, but she kind of warms up to her. She sees Sage's interest as genuine because Beatrix is a very good actor. She's been doing this a long time. So she's convincing to Sarah that she genuinely wants to figure out what's going on, but as observant as Sarah is, she's going to start to see some of the other pieces and parts of what's going on, maybe even before Beatrix does, but maybe kind of holding on to them, not speaking up right away, because she's not sure and she's not one to get in the middle of other people's business. But I'm hoping maybe the reader will kind of pick up on some of those things from the limited perspective that they'll see of Sarah, and that will help me kind of guide Beatrix as she is investigating on what she should pay attention to. And I think she's going to be surprised in a few instances where Sarah presents something to her that she's picked up on, but that Beatrix has not yet noticed because she's got so many focuses in the investigation. So I think those are a couple of things. Bringing Rhys in, she's going to be part of the problem, part of the chaos. And then I am still considering what I'm going to do with Arya's mom, but I think that there is going to be some sort of complicated, toxic relationship there with Sage that has caused problems within the family that has then caused other people in the family to act out and cause harm to other people as well. Leon's is more obvious. Arya, I think, as I delve into kind of who she actually is, she was perceived by people at school as just kind of, you know, this quiet, under the radar kind of girl who didn't really attract a lot of attention. But the reader will start learning as Beatrix investigates that a lot of that was either an act to kind of cover up some of the other nasty stuff she was doing, or a way of staying out of the, you know, main group of students' notice so she can cause chaos on a different level. to where nobody's going to link it back to her necessarily, but she can quietly observe and see the damage that she's causing amongst other people. So I'm still, like I said, putting together some of the pieces of those and figuring out exactly how I'm going to link everybody together and what some of the damages that they're causing with other people. But going back through these chapters and looking at where I've kind of missed opportunities to include characters or to deepen manipulations or relationships or side thoughts that I kind of brought up but then didn't really follow up on, looking for those opportunities where I can add to that and make this a more complicated web of manipulation and damage and hurt and pain and all of the things that these guys are unleashing onto their community, putting in jeopardy both their world and Beatrix's world as well, which I still haven't come up with a name for. So I guess I need to think of that too. And then the other thing that I did start working on with revisions is changing some of the aspects of Sage and where things stand with her parents. I made some changes to chapter 1 where it's a little bit more obvious that there are problems in the household and that it's coming from both the mom's and the dad's side of things. And Beatrix is slightly aware of this. She has gotten some information in the initial file that there is some family tension going on when she first arrives there. And I also changed in the first chapter Beatrix's attitude toward how she starts the investigation. In the first version, it was really kind of exploratory, and she was just kind of generally checking things out, seeing where things lie, because I think I didn't really know for sure where I was going to go with various aspects of the story. So I didn't really focus in on anything particular. But as I've written more of Beatrix and as I've become more familiar with her character and her attitude toward what she's doing, I've really built on the tension she has with Cal, with her knowing that Cal is often on these types of missions trying to get her trapped or in trouble or complicate her ability to finish the mission. So when she first kind of wakes up and gets Sage's body moving, she is aware that, okay, this is a teenage case, so there are some immediate complications. And that is part of what I had been struggling with in the later chapters. Teenagers have rules, they have restrictions, and when there's problems at home, they have even more rules and restrictions. So rather than Beatrix kind of just sitting there and being like, let me take a look at everything, she knows, because of her vast experience, that she needs to have ways out. She needs to know how to sneak out, where the exits are, how easy or difficult that's going to be, how hard is it going to be to lie to or get around the parents. So I went back and especially on chapter 1 and reworked that chapter to make her more observant and planning from the get-go of, okay, this is a teenage girl who's got problems with her parents. There's going to be some obvious restrictions on her moving around and doing what she needs to do. So I think that not only strengthens the first chapter from the story side of things, because you get a little bit more into the conflict between Cal and Beatrix. You get to know that she is pretty experienced in what she's doing, so she knows what to do the second she shows up in this body. And it gives a better sense of what's to come, that these things are going to be needed, which I'm building into that with the revisions that I'm doing. The parents are going to be stricter right off the bat, going to get grounded and have her privileges taken away much quicker, which means Beatrix is going to have to be a little bit more resourceful and really work on figuring out how to get around things and still access what she needs to access. So that's kind of where I'm at so far. In going through and doing these revisions, I was at 24,751 words before I started doing revisions. And at this point, I'm at 27,201 words. So I've added quite a bit, but I've also cut quite a bit. So it's kind of balanced out on the plus side. And that has mainly been adding more indication of the relationship between Cal and Beatrix and the problems there, but also world building, bringing in some of the things that I've discovered about how the dimensions work, the process of these karmic investigations, and why they're taking place. So I've brought more of that into the early chapters in a way that I'm introducing it through the problems between Cal and Beatrix for the most part, as she's complaining about him giving her, yet another case that's a short time frame, that's a teenager with extra restrictions and problems. She's able to then kind of in her thoughts introduce the reader to the idea that if she doesn't complete the investigation on time, she'll get stuck in purgatory, or there could be, more serious consequences if she doesn't get out of the body in time, things like that. So I'm looking for ways as I work on these revisions to bring in a lot of that stuff I talked about last episode of how the dimensions work, how the investigations are conducted, what are the rules of these worlds interacting, and just kind of how things are going to progress in the story as far as the paranormal elements that go along with it. This has been a really, I think, helpful time for me to stop and take stock of where things are at, start doing some revisions, and then it's helping me find additional places where I haven't fully thought things out, or I'm seeing, where a part of the story or an aspect of a character is a little bit weak and I need to build up. And that's been helpful because I think I had gotten into a habit with my writing back before all of this and before I kind of stopped writing, basically. I had gotten into a pattern where I felt overly confident in what I was doing. I wasn't being as critical with my own writing. I wasn't seeking outside criticism as much. To be honest, writing at that time was something that I needed to do to stay sane. Where things were at in my life was not a good place. And writing was really the only way that I could deal with a lot of the stress and frustration and just really a lot of negativity that I was experiencing in my life, and I needed to escape. And so, making sure that my writing was hitting certain points or at a certain quality or, whatever it was not my focus during that time. And I think that my writing suffered from that because I was using it mainly as an escape to get away from the stuff I was dealing with in real life. That was the important part of writing. And so I wasn't taking that time to really stop and think back through, okay, does this story make sense? Is this character developing in a way that they should be? Am I missing opportunities? Did I, not fully think through this, that, or the other? And so I think not that I was, turning out like terrible writing, but it wasn't as clean or as well thought out as I think it could be. And that's something I've got some thoughts and ideas and talked with Chris about, actually going through certain older works to really relook at them, because there are some aspects of my earlier writing that were heavily influenced by how I was raised and the relationship I was in at the time and how I saw the world, which is very different from where I sit now. I have reevaluated huge aspects of my life and my worldview and my beliefs and all of that over the last several years, that so much has changed in how I think about and just exist in the world. And I'm really having to kind of rediscover that in my writing, because so much of my writing was, like I said, it wasn't about always the story or the characters. It was about processing and dealing with what I was experiencing in real life. And while writing is a wonderful way to work through and deal with things, it doesn't always put you in the right frame of mind to then look at your work critically and find the flaws and fix them and develop better writing habits. And that's really what I want to focus on right now, is understanding my writing through my current frame of reference and the lens that I view and interact with the world. And then using, what I have, all artists, authors, all of us, we take our experiences and we put that into our work. But then I would really like to get better at the step of, okay, now I take a step back and I critically look at what I'm doing. And then I say, okay, yeah, that chapter that I wrote or that scene or whatever was very useful in working through a particular set of emotions or thoughts or whatever. But is that realistic to the character or the world? Am I making choices about the story that are best for its overall development or pacing or set of clues or whatever it is? Or was that something that I wrote to kind of exercise something that I needed to get out of me? And sometimes those things come together and they work out great. But other times, as I'm definitely seeing more and as I think about and look at some of my older writing, there's a lot of times that those don't necessarily line up. And while I think it is very valuable to maybe just let that all out in that first draft, but it's important to be able to take some time and to look at things with a clearer viewpoint as far as, is this benefiting the story? Is this taking it where it needs to go? And if not, that's okay. Like, that's where I was in that moment when I was writing. But now, how do I go back? How do I fix it or alter it or adjust it to really serve the story and the characters better, rather than just thinking about my needs as the writer and what I needed out of that writing time? So it's an interesting balance. I think going through this process is really helping me see all of that more clearly and helping me see where I need to spend more of my focused energy in a writing project overall. It's not just about the writing, not when I'm writing to publish, to share it as part of my writing business. That can be the first draft, but I need to not stop there and then take those additional steps to get it where I really want it to be. And just to really, improve my own writing and my ability to critique what I'm doing and make those judgments calls in the middle of a project. This has been really helpful to work on the revisions. I'm going to wrap up revising and get some new chapters written this coming week. So I'll kind of be back to my usual approach with the podcast episodes of kind of going through what I accomplished each day and then where I'm at, what I plan to focus on next, and questions that come up and things that I hopefully figure out as I go through this process. Thank you for listening. If you want to take a look at any of my other stuff, you can find me online at delsheriegladden.com. The theme music for the show is by Monplaisir, and I'll be back next week with a new report on what's going on with this project. Thanks so much.